WisconsinEye is in Oshkosh at the 2019 Republican State Convention, interviewing Assembly Speaker Robin Vos. Mr. Speaker, thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I appreciate it.
How would you summarize your team's progress in building the budget so far?
Actually, I think we've gotten along really well. Obviously, over the course of the past 8 years, with United Republican control, the arguments were almost always internal. Governor Walker was right 90% of the time, but not 100. The Senate was right about 90% of the time, but not 100. And they might say the same thing about us. So we had a lot to agree on, but some of the things that we disagreed on became a little more contentious than you would have liked, especially when you're all on the same team. Now with Governor Evers, where there is a clear difference between his growing government, more welfare, higher taxes, you name the liberal policy, he's put it in his budget. It's really allowed for Republicans in the Assembly and the Senate to remember what we stand for and to focus on our priorities, to say, look, we could have some minor disagreements, but in general, we believe that government should be smaller, taxes should be lower, and freedom should be greater. So I think it's really allowed us to sit down, talk about issues, and focus on what the end priorities are. We're going to pass a budget by the end of June. It's going to be relatively close to where we were before, which means we're going to spend the revenues that we take in on investments in public schools and tech colleges and raises for public workers and all the things that we know have to happen to keep Wisconsin growing. But we're certainly not going to increase taxes, expand welfare, and do all the repeals of the last 8 years that Governor Evers proposed of Governor Walker's tenure in office.
The current budget, I think, put additional $635 million more into K-12.
The Walker budget did.
Yes.
Yes.
The one we're in right now.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Are you going to be able to, especially with the additional $753 million, are you going to be able to put $700, $800 million more, which includes more money for special ed? In other words, not what the governor wanted. He wanted $1.415 billion, but are you going to be able to exceed what was put in during the current biennium?
So just kind of big picture. Record new revenues that we had even before the revenue estimates. So we had about $1.8 billion to do something with. Okay, about $800 million of that was already spoken for in the last budget. That's the cost to continue, raises for public employees, all the things that are kind of part of our normal process. So we have around $1 billion to invest in something. So that $1 billion is going to go for the university, for K-12 education, for any kind of money we put into tech schools or Medicaid, healthcare. So in my mind, we should probably do it close to the proportions of what the budgets are. We know that a little bit less than half goes toward K-12 education. So to me, that number for K-12 should be $400-500 million-ish, somewhere in there. I believe that if we look at the rest, we should spend a couple $100 million plus the federal match on Medicaid. So I think that we have more than enough resources with $1 billion to invest in keeping sure that we move Wisconsin forward without having to raise any taxes, without having to do any of that. Now, as far as the new money that just came in, by law, half of that automatically goes in the rainy day fund. So we now have the largest rainy day fund in history, once again because of Republicans knowing that at some point the economy is going to turn. We sit here in May. When we get to the end of June, that will be the longest economic expansion in our country's history. So that says to me that probably sometime in the next 2 to 4 years, things are going to slow down just because of the natural economic cycle. Well, creating a bunch of brand new government spending, not putting money away for a rainy day, all of those things are going to make the next legislature's or a future legislature's job even more difficult. So my hope is to spend as little as we can of the newfound dollars, put it in our savings account, waiting for, if a bad day comes. If not, we've still got this $1 billion that we're investing in all of our priorities. So my hope is that we can show that we are doing what the people want, still trying to find common ground with Tony Evers where we can, but blowing up government, expanding welfare, raising taxes, those are all non-starters for us.
The cost to continue, according to the Fiscal Bureau, just for MA is about $320 million. So are you going to be able to put, I assume you're going to meet that commitment because that's cost to continue.
Yep.
And
that's part of the $800 million I'd referenced earlier.
Yes. Are you going to be able to do any of these additional healthcare spending that the governor recommended, but when we don't expend Medicaid under his budget, it's questionable whether we can turn to dental reimbursements and things like that? We're going to be able to expand healthcare programs.
Yes. I think we're going to be able to make additional investments. Now, the question comes down to it, as I discussed in my talk today. We already do a really good job of taking care of people in poverty. If you're at 100% or below of poverty, no co-payments, no deductibles, you have free health insurance. But it really traps you into that cycle of poverty because you make $1 more, you lose all your benefits. Yeah. So what happens? People only take a very small part-time job. They know that they have to keep that. So we don't want to expand a system that traps people in poverty. We want to expand a system that allows people to have opportunity. So should we increase our rates to make sure that we keep up with costs for people who do provide that Medicaid service? Yes. And I think we'll be able to do that within that $1 billion that we have to be able to invest in programs like it.
Would that include some MA reimbursement rate increase?
I hope so, yeah. I mean, that's what we have to negotiate with our colleagues, but my hope is that we would look at the access points that are critical: hospitals, mental health services, nursing homes, and dental. Those are kind of the four that when I look at the list, that's where I'd like to try to have us prioritize.
Oh, let's talk about highway funding. Are we going to be back where the Assembly takes one position, Senate takes one position? Because when I just talked to Senator Fitzgerald, he said, well, we are interested in revisiting registration fees, titling fees, and ask him about gas tax, and he wouldn't say that his caucus is committed to that. Where do you read your caucus now on highway funding?
Sure. We are probably more open to a long-term solution than the Senate might be. But, I've learned in this job that I can either swing for the fences or take a series of singles. So I think we swung for the fences last time, wanting to have a long-term, 10-year, let's fix this once and for all. We weren't able to get that done. Governor Evers made a mistake, I would say. I mean, I could not be much more open to fixing transportation than any legislative leader that I have known. And instead of saying, how about if we sit down, let's see what we could work out, he kind of threw a Hail Mary pass out there without talking to a single person. And I think made it more difficult to find an answer rather than easier. So my hope is that we sit down with the Senate. I think we're making pretty good progress. I feel good about where we are. I think we're going to have significant revenues for transportation. I think we're going to be able to find a solution that is multi-year, so it's not just one budget cycle at a time, and be able to do it in a way that hopefully will get through both chambers.
Well, when I asked Senator Fitzgerald about the additional $753 million, he first brought up the potential of using some of that to fix bridges, which is one-time fixes. Is that on? Is your caucus considering that?
We haven't talked about it. I guess I'd be open to the idea of paying down debt, some of those kind of things. But I am very, very reluctant to take money from our general fund, which funds the university, education, prisons, the DNR, all those functions, and now also have it start funding transportation when we know we have other needs. I believe transportation should be a user fee-based system. It should not be focused on people who pay income taxes, only funding roads in addition to everything else. I like the idea of trying to get people from out of state to pay for roads that they utilize. So I would love to have that be part of the discussion. But just taking more money out of the general fund, even if it's a good purpose, kind of is a little bit backwards to me, because the only people who pay into that general fund for the most part are people from Wisconsin. And we know that 25% of people who use a highway are from out of state or are traveling through. So I want to find things that capture those out of state revenues, but I also want to find something that can get across the finish line and not just have another, Charlie Brown in the football, where we miss it again, and all of a sudden we have another discussion 2 years from now.
If you think tolling is an eventual solution, and let's say the tolling is 4 to 6 years out, you're looking for a plan then to fund it for the next 4 to 6 years until we can potentially get to tolling?
Yeah, or some kind of a mileage-based system. I would say this, tolling is one aspect. It could be some kind of a voluntary mileage system, or, I don't want to
disclose whether you drove 12 or 36,000.
I don't want to have black boxes in people's cars, but, some way to recognize that, I read an article not too long ago that said that by the year 2030, about 1/3 of the vehicles on the road are going to be electric powered. So we're still going to have 2/3 that are something else, but we can't expect the 2/3 of cars on the road to pay for 100% of the traffic that's actually on a highway. So we've got to figure out some way to begin capturing people who are not using gasoline. Now, it's not today. It is not an imminent crisis in the next 1 to 2 years. But if we don't start thinking forward as to what it's going to be like, the people who sit in office a decade from now are going to look back and say, why didn't they just do it when they could have, as opposed to when it becomes incredibly difficult?
Will your party's 2-year budget include another middle income tax cut, similar in terms of the package size to the one the governor vetoed?
That hasn't been determined. One of the things that I am most proud of is that there has never been a budget that passed Republican-controlled legislature that didn't have some reductions in taxes in it. Now, you remember during the last Finance Committee process, we actually cut the cable tax. So that's one we've already done, where it's going to phase out over time, so that people who have cable wouldn't pay tax, just like somebody who has DirecTV doesn't pay tax now, to make them level. So we've got one tax cut already built in. I do think if we could do the middle income tax cut, I would love to. I was deeply disappointed that Tony Evers, in one of the most partisan moves I have ever seen, said that we're not going to take your plan, his plan, and sign it into law, knowing that that would be the basis for what we do inside the budget. So I would love to be able to go back and revisit that. But we've got a lot of priorities, and I don't know if our caucus wants to go back and focus on Tony Evers' tax cuts when there's a lot of other ideas that people have to reduce taxes in different ways.
One more tax thing that that your team has left in the budget: $5,000 per year deduction for first-time home buyers. You want that to be a part of your final budget?
So part of my focus, hopefully over the next 4 to 6 years, is going to be on figuring out ways that we can deal with the growing dependence on government, period, right? So we know that we've got to do a better job helping people save for their own retirement, because if they don't save, somebody else pays for it. We know that we've got to do a better job helping younger people be able to afford a home, because the home is the basis for most people's financial legacy for themselves, their kids, their grandkids. So I think things like that encourage people to save for their first house is exactly in line with where we want to be as conservatives, and that is to help you save for yourself so you're not more reliant on government.
One of the lines that you did draw in the sand is that if the governor vetoes the entire Republican budget, the second one will spend much, much less.
I didn't say much. It'll spend less.
It'll spend less. Thank you for the correction. But it will spend less.
Correct. Yeah.
And why would you hold out any hope that he'd sign the second one spending less?
Right, which is why we might as well work on the first one. And I've been trying to say that over and over, that by saying you don't want to meet with us, by basically saying it's my way or the highway, and somehow you're going to tweet us, on Twitter and bashing us, and which is all he's been doing with his staff. It's actually making a decision even easier for an awful lot of us, because if he refuses to work with us, we're going to do what we were like to do, which is to pass a budget. He then has the most powerful line item veto in the country, and he can choose to cut out the things he doesn't agree with. But at the end of the day, there are certain things we are never, ever going to accept. We are never going to increase income or sales taxes, and we are not going to expand welfare. So I said to him, besides those two things, let's sit down and talk about it. And those are so important to his vision of growing government that he has not wanted to sit down with us. Well, by vetoing the budget, that doesn't put us in a difficult spot, because we just go back to the old level of spending. So for somebody who wants to spend less money, it's a pretty easy thing to say, well, let's sit and wait, and we'll come back in October, and we'll come back after the summer, and we'll look again and pass a new budget if we had to, which I hope we wouldn't, that'll spend less, because people are not going to, they're going to realize quickly that government's growing too much. And I know we win that argument.
Senator Fitzgerald, when I asked him the same question, first he said, I would really hope, as you do, the governor doesn't veto our budget.
I think it'd be silly. It hasn't happened since 1931.
Thank you. Thank you for that bit of history. I didn't know that. But then Senator Fitzgerald said if he did, we might have to come back and pass a transportation budget, a K-12 budget.
Yeah.
Is that an option?
It's possible, but again, I would come back in October and we would do a veto override. The first thing we would do is to say, okay, we've had all summer. The world has not come to an end. Let's just agree that Governor Evers made a mistake if he chooses to veto the entire thing, and we do a veto override. If that's unsuccessful because Democrats look out for their governor as opposed to their district and their schools and their municipalities, then maybe we'd have to look at doing piecemeal legislation to fund our schools. But if we do it piecemeal, that's going to spend a whole lot less, because there are whole areas of state government that we're going to say we're not even going to pass a budget dealing with that because the old level of funding is just fine. So I just think that Governor Evers, if he really thinks it through, and I give him credit, he has never said he's going to veto the budget. He has always said he wants to see what's going to come out. We're going to spend that $1 billion and invest it in things that he cares about too, just like I do. If he wants to spend $2 or $3 billion, well, he's not going to get that. So somehow thinking that they're going to hold out for more spending is where he would make a serious mistake. But he's got to make his own decision.
He was superintendent of public instruction. He never served in the ledge. Have you seen Governor Evers grow into the job in the first 4 months in office, Mr. Speaker?
No.
No?
No, I have not. I have actually hoped for more. For someone who was a statewide constitutional officer who had very little interaction with the legislature, I think in my entire 8 years in leadership between the Joint Finance Committee and being Speaker, I had met with him once or twice. So he was really a non-entity inside the Capitol. And unfortunately, I think he's chosen the same role as governor.
Only once or twice?
Yeah, in the entire 8 years. So I think he's become kind of a non-entity in the Capitol as well. He is not forceful in trying to even bring people together. He is not saying, let's sit down and figure this out. That's what a governor does. He's choosing to not do that. It's all mean tweets from his staff, a bunch of snide remarks. That is not the way you bring people together. I look at the role of leader, right, which is really what the governor is supposed to be in our branch of government. I don't see it. What's he leading on? I can't think of a single topic. So unfortunately, I'm optimistic that, we're only 4 months in, 5 months in. He's got a long way to go. So I'm sure he will get better as he goes. But my hope is that the first thing he gets better at is communications with the people who are elected just like he is, and realizing that it's not a kingdom. We don't bow. We have the ability to sit down as equals at a table and talk. But that really has to happen if he chooses to do it, because we're ready, willing, and able.
Senator Johnson asked for some type of a financial follow-up on how the party spent its money in the last election. Have you read that? What happened? Is the party in bad financial straits?
The party's fine now, but like every party during an election time, you shake the pillows and try to figure out how do we get every single dollar out of the couch, right? So they did that. We had a deficit as we left the election, which is not surprising. There were some things that if I had been in charge, and of course I'm not, I might not have spent them the same way, but it's easy to be an armchair quarterback looking backwards. But I prefer to go forward. So we are on good financial footing now. We know that both legislative campaign committees have done a really good job of maintaining the majorities. We know Senator Johnson, along with our congressional delegation, have also done a good job. We're going to be ready for 2020. But I also have to be honest and say we need to do better jobs at some things. We've got to do a better job with the grassroots. We've got to do a better job reaching out to make sure that we are fighting for every elected official to get elected rather than focusing on a single office. So 2020, in my mind, should not be all about Donald Trump. He is on the ballot, but so are 99 candidates in the legislature and 33 candidates in the Senate and people running for county treasurer and all kinds of different positions. So my hope is that we expand the map by having more races, more involvement, more people, and hopefully a unified message that all of us benefit from.
A couple other issues. The Dark Star controversy has been around for 2 or 3 years. Yeah. Ledge Council has now recommended 3 bills. Do you see your House acting on them?
I do. I will say for sure 2 of the bills sound like they have they found consensus, and that's the whole point of a Ledge Council study, is to take people who have very different ideas, sit them at the same table, and see what's common that we can actually pass into law. So my understanding is 2 of the bills are ready for prime time. We'll probably take those up in the fall. Another one we're probably going to need some work on to be able to actually find some consensus between some disparate groups. But I also want to say that the basic idea of dark stores is that in Wisconsin's uniformity clause, you have 2 duplexes, as an example, each built in the same year. They're worth the same amount of money. Whatever the rent is, that is irrelevant until it gets sold, right? Because it might result in a higher revenue for the person who sells the entity. That's what the new value is, right? It's based on the actual sale.
Yes.
So under what they want is they want to say, well, this is what we think you could rent it for. So we want to charge you a lot higher rent because whether you choose to rent it for that level or not, you could. They then assess it at that high level and come back and say, wait a minute, we're not getting it at that level. We're only getting half the rent you said. We want a refund. And they're saying that that is somehow a loophole because they incorrectly assess the property. So I do think the League of Municipalities has successfully muddied the discussion to somehow make it seem like there's this tax break for big corporations. No, what happens is some greedy municipalities are taxing them way too much. And then the court, an independent branch, liberals and conservatives on courts, have given refunds based on real assessments. Well, that's the process, is the way it's supposed to work. So my hope is there are some things we need to fix. That's what these bills deal with. You shouldn't be able to have a property that's hundreds of miles away or permanently reduced in value because of a deed restriction. I mean, there are some real common sense ideas, but somehow to think that we're going to take retailers who are really struggling with the competition of the internet. Look at Shopko. Look at all these people who are closing and dramatically jack up their prices. All that's doing is making them go out of business potentially faster. And you've got another dark store paying nothing. So I think we really should find a compromise and realize there is not only one virtuous side. Each side has very legitimate points, and my hope is we'll be able to find that common ground that addresses the problem, but in a way that doesn't bankrupt the system.
Fast forward to the fall session. The budget is resolved and signed into law. However,
however long.
However it is.
Yeah.
Are you willing to invest any capital in pursuing only medical marijuana in the fall?
I'd like to have the discussion. Okay, so as you know, we've talked about this multiple times before. I support medical marijuana on a very limited basis, and we've got to figure a smart way to do it. I know that many of my colleagues are not there yet, but I also think a good, thoughtful discussion requires a lot of discussion, right? It's not just hurry and rush it in like Tony Evers tried to do in the budget, legalize recreational marijuana. I mean, all these things that are non-starters, which, once again, make my job harder to convince people that this is a good idea on a limited basis. So I think we're going to have an aggressive agenda in the fall. I have my speakers task forces, so we have our clean water efforts. Yeah. We just launched one on making adoption easier. We have another one on suicide prevention.
Suicides. Do you expect them to have recommendations for the fall session?
I do. Joan Ballwig is doing an excellent job as the co-chair to really reach out, figure out what the issues are dealing with mental health.
Is there any one personal suicide that touched you enough to form this that you might want to share? If not, I respect that.
Yeah, I'll be honest. The issue came because of Joan's passion. About a year and a half ago, the gentleman that I lived with all during college, 2 beautiful kids, married, went out to a cul-de-sac, took out a gun, and shot himself, right? And nobody saw it coming. I had talked to him not too long before that.
We also lost a state senator.
Oh, exactly, right, exactly. So I just think there's something that's going on in society now. There's a lot of reasons, right? Is it the stress of everyday life today? Is it social media? Bullying is certainly something for young people. All those are things that we can't necessarily control, but we can do a better job addressing. So I look at these issues and say, we're going to have a busy fall. Hopefully the budget's done, like you said, but adoption, suicide prevention, clean water task force, medical marijuana. I mean, I think we have a lot of stuff to do, which is why I hope Governor Evers doesn't force us to spend the entire fall going back over the budget that we're doing now, just to kind of check off stuff on his liberal wish list.
2 final questions.
Yeah.
And 1 year from now, is Foxconn manufacturing at its site in Mount Pleasant?
Yeah, 1 year from now, if it's June. I believe they're going to open up sometime between May and June. My belief is that there will be well over 1,000 jobs to start, because remember, it's phased in over a decade. It's not like 13,000 jobs were boom, just going to happen all at once. So I believe that we are going to continue to see the upside of Foxconn. One area that I give Tony Evers some credit on, that he's actually been open-minded to say he started out super negative on Foxconn. He now has met with the chairman. He's been more upbeat. I hope that's something that we could all say, boy, let's put politics aside. Good paying jobs have no political party. He should be able to take credit for them as they are formed, just like we took credit for them as they were created. So hopefully we get over that, and hopefully we can all be celebrating in a year when we go to La Crosse. No, it's Green Bay for the next convention for Republicans, I think.
You didn't see any waning in Terry Go's interest in Wisconsin since
Zero.
He wants to be president of Taiwan?
Yep, 0.
Okay. Who's on your list as Republican candidates for governor in 2022? Ron Johnson?
I think there's a ton of well-qualified people.
Sean Duffy?
Yep, Rebecca Clayfish, Mike Gallagher. I mean, I don't even know. I don't want to say people's names because there are probably others who are thinking
But
about it.
don't put your name on that list?
Don't put my name on. I love being speaker. I think I have the best job in the Capitol, and I am excited that we're going to be able to do some things with Governor Evers. I assume he's a one-termer, but I don't know that. So I look at this and say to myself, we're probably going to have a Republican for governor in 2022 because they will have seen what it looks like with a Democrat in charge, right? Okay. Proposing higher taxes, all kinds of radical ideas. So I think the Republican starts out as a natural front runner, and that means there's going to be a competitive primary, right? A whole lot of people who want to lead Wisconsin. And my job is to make sure that we have teed up lots of good conservative reforms so that when a Republican comes to town in 2022, we'll have the chance to put a whole bunch of those into place to keep Wisconsin where we are today.
Should we add Paul Farrell's name to the wannabe list?
That's a definitely one. Yep, he wants to talk about it too.
U.S. Senate in 2022, Scott Walker?
Yeah, same list. Scott Walker's
same list
to it. Yeah, but I think a lot of those people are going to look. I hope Ron Johnson runs again. I think I do. I think he is a fantastic leader. He's the kind of person that we need in the U.S. Senate who would have seniority. He's smart. He's tenacious. He understands the common Wisconsin sense of where we want things to be and the work ethic that we have. So I hope he runs again. If he doesn't, then you're right. We have a whole long list of very well-qualified people. Brad Schimmel. I mean, there's a long list of people who would deserve the job if it was an open chance. But it's way too early to tell because you got to get President Trump reelected. We got to keep the majorities in the legislature in 2020. Then we'll worry about 2022 afterward.
And you think Scott Walker still wants to run for something?
Wouldn't surprise me. I mean, he's certainly got a hell of a record to be proud of, especially as a Republican. But I also look and say, 2022 is a long way away. Who knows what opportunities come forward? Who knows what things he has on his mind? Just like all of us, it's not usually wise to think more than one election cycle ahead. So 2020 is where we should be focused. 2022 is sometime in the future.
Speaker Robin Voss,
Always enjoy it. Thanks,
thank you
Steve.
very much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.